All right, let's talk about Xbox. Redfall released last week to not the most glowing reception, and it seems like for some people it's been a bit of a final straw situation. I've just seen a lot more visible frustration and open talk about the current state of Xbox. Something else that was kind of timed really well with this was that Phil Spencer did an interview with the Kinda Funny Xcast, which I think was actually scheduled before they saw the reception for Redfall, but they followed through, and that just brought a lot more kind of talking points up. And I wanted to wait a little bit for the dust to settle, just to talk about some things going on right now, just as far as, what's been going on with Xbox the last couple years, both the good and the bad, why there is some major frustration from those that are invested in using Xbox as a platform, and what might be coming in the future that could help alleviate this. Before I dive into it though, one thing I just want to touch on really quick, and I normally don't do this with these videos, but I just kind of feel the need to mention real quick, and I don't care about console wars. There's been a rivalry between PlayStation and Xbox specifically for a while now. It really started picking up pace during the Xbox 360 and PS3 time, and for a while it was the more traditional kind of gentle ribbing of which system you prefer. In the last couple years, quite frankly, it has just gotten completely ugly in a way that I absolutely hate to see happen. Personally, I don't care what someone's favorite platform is for playing games. I care about games themselves. I care about the medium, how it pushes things forward, and how it resonates with the players who enjoy them. And as part of that, it's important to sometimes touch on and talk about stuff like this, because while I do have the ability to play across a large variety of systems, I play stuff on Xbox, Switch, PlayStation, PC, not everyone always has that option and chooses to invest in one specific platform, and it's important to keep people informed on how that's all going. So the things I'm going to be talking about in this video, this isn't about defending Xbox or trying to destroy them or saying that Phil Spencer needs to quit or something. I just want to talk about what's going on in the landscape right now and why there is definitely some frustration out there. By the way, I got more Xbox content in the works, hopefully a lot of it on a more positive note than this one, but if you don't want to miss out on that stuff, make sure to subscribe. And I want to start with Redfall because that really was, I think, the big thing that catalyzed a lot of additional talk the past couple weeks. And a large part of that conversation really has a lot less to do with Redfall itself specifically, as much as it has to do with the sort of perceived flow of major big budget AAA titles that are first party Xbox. Don't get me wrong, the game absolutely has its problems, though I will say I've put some time into it and I think I like it a little more than some people have really railed against it on, but definitely has its problems that need work. But so much of the conversation around it, I think, is centered more on not what Redfall itself specifically as a game was, but what it represents as being the kind of first major AAA release that Xbox has had after quite a bit of a lull. When the system first released, there wasn't a ton of launch content right there in 2020. 21 had a couple major releases with Halo Infinite and Forza Horizon 5. 22 had smaller releases, some of which that I really enjoyed and loved, but aren't exactly the kind of big budget titles people are looking to define a console by. And this year, while we had a wonderful surprise at the start of the year with Hi-Fi Rush, Redfall's the kind of game that I think more people are looking at as far as what it means to be a first-party game. And on that front, it didn't really deliver on it, which, by the way, makes me all the more worried for when Starfield eventually comes out, because I'm a big fan of Bethesda titles. Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind is one of my favorite games of all time. I also enjoyed Skyrim. I enjoyed other Fallout games, not 76 so much. And while I love those games a lot, one thing that I've accepted about Bethesda is that you're gonna get bugs at launch. It's just a part of the experience. And some people swear off buying those games at launch day because they don't want to support those kind of buggy launches, something I totally respect. But while that kind of pushback has existed in the past, I think it pales into comparison to the amount of scrutiny and expectations that are going to be leveled on Starfield now because of the fact that Redfall got the reception that it did. And as of right now, until we maybe get some more reveals during the upcoming showcase in June, it's basically the one major title that a lot of people are looking forward to this year. No offense to Forza. Forza's a great game. I just think that's sort of a stable rock that people know what they're going to get with that for the most part, and we're trying to find some wins in some other franchises. I do think some of the conversation around this particular aspect of things is a little hyperbolic in some ways because, again, the focus is so heavily on bigger budget titles and not necessarily on just all exclusives and things that are released. Because obviously there's been a very slow release schedule for actual big budget titles that are pushing hardware as hard as they can. But there have been some wonderful smaller scale projects, some of which I already touched on. Hi-Fi Rush was incredible. Pentiment last year was built for a very specific kind of audience, and I am a part of that audience. It was one of my favorite titles at 22. Another one last year, As Dusk Falls, I had no initial interest in, but actually fell in love with once I gave it a chance on Game Pass. And so I think Xbox is having some good success when it comes to smaller scale, more experimental titles, these kind of enthusiast projects that come from some of their devs. But what people are really waiting on and focusing on is something that is some kind of generation-defying, hardware-pushing, big AAA game. And something that I think plays a really big role in this is actually something that Phil Spencer himself touched on in his recent interview with Kinda Funny Xcast, is the fact that, look, Xbox is not a console anymore. Sure, there is the Xbox hardware, but ultimately Xbox as a platform is targeted much more now at trying to play a different kind of game where they are focusing more on services, they are focusing more on accessibility through a variety of devices. Ever since there's been the focus on making sure their releases come out on PC as well, that automatically has a bit of a trade-off of that you're supporting a wider number of platforms and you're not always going to get that same degree of focused optimization that we see on some titles. And despite the fact that is the direction I think Xbox is really trying to go, that's not really the way that most people view and talk about them, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of people would rather just treat them as a more traditional, straightforward console manufacturer. There are a lot of people who would rather see Xbox focus more on traditional console business, make the Xbox system itself the sole focus, have some major exclusive titles just for that platform that can really be optimized perfectly for it. And quite frankly, that just isn't what Xbox is interested in. One of the things Phil Spencer said himself was the idea that, focusing just on making individual great titles for their hardware isn't going to be the thing that completely changes the current console landscape with which systems are most popular. And for better or worse, that is the strategy they're going with, which I think there absolutely is merit to, but there are drawbacks with that approach as well. I mean, one of the upsides to this is the fact that a lot of Xbox games have way more ways of being accessed than a lot of other consoles. You don't have to own an Xbox to engage with Xbox content, whether that's on a PC or relying on cloud services using mobile. I genuinely think there is something cool about this approach of giving more people ways of choosing how they interact and access these games. It's just going to have its natural drawbacks compared to the more traditional approach that other manufacturers have been going with. Big exclusives aren't the only issue, by the way. Something else that's been cropping up a little more recently that I could absolutely see being frustrating for people who have chosen to focus on Xbox as their platform of choice is the fact that we're seeing a lot of titles that are explicitly choosing not to release on Xbox, not just simply choose one console to focus on. Square Enix in particular is a company that I think has a large catalog that has been doing this lately. Some games have been fully multi-platform getting Xbox releases, like Diofield Chronicle or the most recent Star Ocean, but when you look at a lot of their major titles that are not exclusives, we're seeing releases that aren't coming to Xbox specifically. Stuff like Octopath Traveler 2, the most recent Theatrhythm, the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Collection. These are all titles that are getting Switch, PC, PlayStation releases, in some case even mobile, but don't come specifically to Xbox. And if those are games that look cool to you and the Xbox is the one gaming platform that you have, it's kind of a sucky feeling to see happen. What compounds all of this even more has been the communicated message the past couple years, and what feels like a bit of a recurring story of waiting for the day that the windfall happens and suddenly a lot more games release. There's been a lot of talk the past couple years in regards to studios that Xbox has acquired, and while we've seen some games released from some of these studios, there's been a whole lot of other situations where we've gotten a name drop for a game and then not really any info since, and there's that constant waiting game of when stuff is actually releasing. A really good example of this is last year, Xbox had their major showcase in June, and a large focus of that showcase was, hey, everything we're showing here is going to be released within the next year, which is a really cool message. I even said back at that time, it's really cool that they're emphasizing and focusing more on the near future. And that didn't end up being the case for a lot of those releases. Redfall and Starfield were both titles that were talked about, which Redfall did end up making it just in time for that window, but Starfield obviously got pushed back further and is coming out in September. And there were other games featured in that showcase that we still have not seen materialize yet. I think something that does play a large part in this is the fact that when it comes to the concept of major AAA big budget titles, the windows and dev cycles for these games are getting so much larger and larger that, based on when Xbox acquired some of these studios, it wasn't realistic to think that we were going to get big major games within the next 2 or 3 years, but we are beginning to hit the point where after so many games have been talked about, hinted at, or promised, and we just haven't gotten any kind of hard update on a lot of them, the waiting game has just become very frustrating. Now, on that note, it is May right now, and that means that June is right around the corner, which is, again, that big time of year for a lot of announcements. It used to be E3 season, now I guess it's Summer Games Fest season, whatever you want to call it. The point is that this is going to be the time that, they have the opportunity to have another showcase and talk about what is on the horizon, what's being released, and hopefully it is for things that actually are on a realistic timetable. And while I don't think any particular single showcase is going to be a make or break moment for a company, I think this is a really important one for Xbox because it's going to set the tone for how the rest of the year moving forward looks. Because ultimately, a lot of this is also just the perception of how everything is going. Again, I think that the Hi-Fi Rush reveal at the start of the year was wonderful. That was a great showcase, and I think it did a great job of updating people on what games were in the works and having that awesome surprise reveal. And then just other things happening over the course of the year, including games being pushed back, the performance of some games that had multi-platform releases, including those that are now first-party games, like Ghostwire Tokyo, and this most recent reception of Redfall has just really soured a bit of the tone that this upcoming showcase really needs to work against. I'm not really big on doom and gloom proclamations. I don't think it's fair to say something like Xbox is dying, or Xbox is dead, or this is the final nail in the coffin. All that kind of stuff I think is a bit too hyperbolic. But I think it is very fair to say that there's been a very palpable degree of frustration that's been going on lately that Xbox needs to try and get starting turned around, whether that's with brand refreshes, updating the system UI to give it a more fresh look, actually getting some major titles begin to release, and hopefully have them release in great states that get good reception. There's a lot of projects that we've heard about, had announcements of, that personally I am very excited for, at least in concept, and I can't wait to see and learn more about. Not just the ones that are coming soon like Starfield, but also other games like Avowed, probably my personally most excited game for the Xbox platform, conceptually at least. And I would love to see all of that stuff work out well and have a bunch of major titles begin to finally release. Because again, the main thing I really care about, having good games that are fun to play, that resonate with players. And quite frankly, I am just tired of how much the dialogue these days is focused more on just wanting to see the other guy lose. So there's just some thoughts about Xbox right now. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later.